What is going on, guys? Jack here and welcome to Football Manager 2019 video, and today I want to talk all about playing with three central defenders, how to do it, roles to consider, just some food for thought I guess. Trying something different with this video, so if you do enjoy it, do leave a like, let me know what you think of this kind of content, maybe I'll do more of it. And well, to start with, I want to talk about player roles with three at the back, because I feel like this is something that very occasionally people get wrong, but I want to talk about kind of different setups to consider what I'd recommend and kind of the strengths and weaknesses of each. So here we are at Watford. I've just selected Watford for the sake of this kind of guide, and well, we're going to see here what I'd consider to be a fairly standard three at the back system. Now the roles in themselves in terms of centre defender, ball playing defender, no nonsense centre back, they're very much going to be determined by the system that you're playing. For here I'm just running a custom variant of the tick-attacker preset that's just in game. But the roles themselves in terms of the duties is what we're kind of interested in here. So this is one of the most common systems, I guess, with a three at the back. We have Mariappa playing as a defender, Cathcart at right centre-back playing as a defender, and then Kabasele playing as a covering centre-back. Naturally, the strength of this system is that Kabasele is going to look to sweep from behind. I mean, it literally will say here in the description. You can see on the covering duty, he's going to drop deeper and look to sweep in the balls in behind. Generally speaking, this will be your fast centre-back who might not be quite so good in the air. I'd still recommend with all centre-backs that they have good jumping reach and good heading, just as is personal preference. But this centre-back here, not quite as essential as perhaps the others. I think the big things really for this guy are going to be stuff like decision making and concentration and anticipation. Those are three mentals which I think are essential for this kind of role in a team. And this probably gives you some of the best balance. It allows you to have the strength of kind of having two centre-backs with two players on defend, but having this third player with the cover duty, or rather role, is in a position where they can, well, they can cover up the mistakes, can't they? That would often go punished with a system that used fewer at the back. But there are other systems that I see used, and there are other roles. So one of the kind of most common things I'll see on wider centre defenders, and one that I definitely recommend, is trying out playing players as stoppers. The aim with this being that they are going to close down the play a little bit more. They're going to be more willing to go in and try and win the ball slightly higher up the pitch rather than sit back and wait for the attackers to come to them. Obviously, the big strength with this in this kind of system is that a stopper is going to get forward, and there's going to be plenty of cover in behind. You know, if Cathcart chooses to more order forward here, Kabasele is going to shift across, Mariappa is going to shift across as well, and you've kind of got that insurance policy. If you were to be playing with two centre defenders, one of them goes for a ball as a stopping defender, you've only got that one player on the cover, you can very much leave yourself exposed, particularly obviously if a team is playing against you with more than one striker. That can prove quite troublesome. So yes, stoppers very good. I quite like stoppers in general. They can work with a coverer. You could also try them with just a regular defender. Or, and maybe people weren't expecting me to even talk about this, the libero is now a centre-back role in Football Manager 2019, and I think this is actually a role that you can definitely utilise. As you can see here, not your conventional centre-back role. It comes with the support and attack duty, more of a conventional, well, old-school sweeper in a lot of ways, the libero. But the libero itself is now a centre-back role and duty, which, to be honest, I think actually suits it in terms of modern football. I think a prime example of this kind of player is probably someone like David Luiz at Chelsea. Of course, he is superb at centre-back. He likes to get higher up the pitch. He likes to push up that little bit further forward. And as a libero, they're going to start deeper. They're going to, if they play the support duty, look to cover a little bit more. But when you do have the ball, they are going to be willing with the ball at their feet to bring it forward. And as you go into the attack, they're going to shift out. They're going to move into this kind of centre defensive mid area of the pitch. Your two remaining centre-backs are going to obviously be left behind. As a result of this, whilst you can definitely have them on stoppers and it won't be a disaster, I tend to like to have both my other defenders, if I am going to play with a libero, on defend. The reason for this being is, obviously, as a stopper, if you're caught out of possession quickly, particularly if you're a more successful, larger team, which I'd imagine you'd be if you're playing with a libero, you're a team you really want to command possession against weaker opposition. Opposition teams are naturally going to be more direct in their play. They're going to be pumping longer balls more often than not. As a result, obviously, you've got to be wary of those big balls over the top that the stoppers are going to try and deal with. And of course, perhaps the most standard of all, I don't want to call it the boring option, but it is just obviously to just play with three centre defenders on defend. This gives you a nice bank of players. Obviously, you don't have that insurance policy of a covering defender, but what you lack in that you more than make up for in essentially creating a big wall in front of your goalkeeper that these players are really going to, well, they're going to give you a lot of defensive strength, and particularly if you're in a lower league save and you want to play free at the back, I think this is the way to go. I will talk shortly about why I actually think in lower league saves it's not always the best idea to play free at the back, but for now, let's move on to centre defensive midfielders and centre midfielders in general, I guess, with this kind of system. Now, the first thing I actually want to talk about isn't to do with free at the back, it's to do with the half-back role, which is, to break this down simply, it's a reverse libero. Instead of being a player who gets forward with the attack, they're a player who, as your team transition into the final third, they're going to drop back. They're essentially going to become a third centre-back who, as your wide players, usually complete wing-backs or wing-backs in general, get forward, they're going to drop back into this more defensive role. I think this is a pretty good system, particularly if you find yourself getting overrun on the counter and you're playing with wing-backs. Maybe you've got a defensive midfielder and you want to kind of eliminate that threat of the counter. The half-back can work quite nicely in this regard, often kind of confused with a bit more of an anchorman. An anchorman is going to sit deeper and just hold his position. A half-back going to drop in, slot between the centre-backs who are kind of going to split either side of him. Half-back can be quite nice when you're transitioning, you know, out of defence into attack and vice versa, particularly if you're kind of getting caught out on the break. Anyway, that wasn't what I was going to talk about initially. What I was going to talk about is centre mid roles. And as you can see here, in this example, I've got the ball winning midfielder and deep line playmaker. I feel like with a free at the back system, particularly if you're playing with three defenders, you're really trying to create a solid bank of players, you know, a defensive foundation for your attacking players to thrive off. As a result, both centre mids are more often than not going to be kind of occupying a more defensive role in this team. You know, when we go forward with possession here, Holbass is obviously going to be pushing forward. Femina is going to be pushing forward as well. And as a result, if you were to have these centre midfielders on more attacking duties, even just one of them, you're very much going to be losing this midfield battle on the counter-attack. It doesn't matter how good your kind of, you know, one of your centre mids is defensively, he is going to be alienated out on his own. And whilst you might think, well, that's fine, you know, I've got three defenders, I do feel like this area in front of the back three is a very important area of the pitch to really occupy. You know, the main strength of a back three is its solidity. And if you can have two really well-balanced centre mid roles, they're going to force the play out wide. They're going to provide a really solid core to your team and kind of congest the centre of your team, which can be very important, particularly with playing with wing-backs, which is more often than not how you're going to be playing with three at the back, or certainly you're going to be playing with you know, wide midfielders or wing-backs. Very rarely are you going to be playing like this with a flat back five, I feel like, in Football Manager. If you play like that, you're a bit of a weirdo, I'm sorry. But, you know, if you're playing this kind of system, you're most vulnerable, actually, when these players have committed up the pitch. And if they have committed up the pitch, I mean, you can see here the red, it's saying the wide areas are weak. The nice thing about these guys is if they are slightly deeper, it means that when the centre-backs need to push wide, or, you know, the coverage is needed out wide, there are men to do that. You know, if we were playing with these guys slightly more attacking, you might be left with just Capoue back. Ball gets lost here, ball comes over, Cathcart comes over, Capoue goes to fill in. Suddenly there's all this space in behind. So actually, I do feel like when it comes to playing a back three, it's really important to consider the kind of centre midfield roles you're going to have. I'll very often see people have a ball-winning midfielder on defend. I think that is a defensive role. It certainly is in terms of pressing and pushing, but don't expect that player to hold the fort. More often than not, my kind of go-to defensive midfielder roles personally are just a centre mid on defend, or a deep line playmaker on defend. They're kind of two that I certainly gravitate towards. You will occasionally see teams run this kind of system, maybe some kind of 3-1-4-2. Not as common in modern football as perhaps some other three at the back systems. I think back to Juventus, who used to play, I believe, like this with you know, this kind of deep line playmaker. It's the kind of role that Pirlo would occupy for Conte's Juventus. And this can definitely work, and obviously the advantage with this is you have a little bit more permission for these guys to get forward, and you still get a little bit of that coverage defensively. I still feel like you have to consider these roles a little bit, but at the same time it does perhaps remove the headache that you will inevitably get if you are trying to play with two centre mids here, because you want them to do stuff going forward and you want them to do stuff going back. I talked about the reason that I felt like free at the back doesn't really work in lower leagues. Just to expand on that a little, I feel like with this kind of system, assuming this is a system that you were considering playing, a lot of your attacking threat is going to come from your front three. You're going to be relying on their dynamism to really make things work. I would say that this is one of the best ways to play this kind of system. Obviously, you could just play with 3 out-and-out strikers. Was very good in Football Manager this year. Last year, I've not actually tried it in FM19 yet. Or you could maybe play them out wide. Inevitably, if you play this kind of system with inside forwards, you probably want to have your wide men, you know, as more kind of wing backs as opposed to wingers that I have here. But yeah, with these players, these 3 players, their fluidity, their creativity is really going to be what's making things shine. Whilst you could perhaps have one of these centre mids have a more attacking duty to try and get forward a little bit more, you know, maybe advanced playmaker on attack. That might solve some of your problems in terms of creating chances. You're certainly going to leave yourself riskily exposed at the back. As a result, you know, more often than not, you're looking at these 2 centre mids to hold the fort, and then it's really about these 5 players here to make things happen, with these players perhaps functioning from deep and making things happen with some nice passes. That's again why I quite like a deep line playmaker in this system, is the long passes from deep can prove quite nice. You know, inevitably with this kind of system with so many players forward, you are going to cause an overload. You are going to cause areas of the pitch where there is going to be space to be exploited and an unmarked man. And a deep line playmaker definitely kind of does a good job of reaching out and kind of finding those players. So in terms of the wide roles, I talked about it already, but you've kind of got 2 options here. You can play with wing backs. Definitely the way that I like to play 3 at the back is wing backs. In terms of if you wanted to play a more conventional system like this, defensive wingers is a role that I see people use occasionally. I will say now, I am not the biggest fan of the defensive winger role just in general. I feel like in modern football, you don't really see wingers in a 3 at the back system in the conventional sense. It's always about having wing backs, and the reason for that being is that the wing back role has become one of the most athletically demanding positions on the pitch. Obviously, if you want to play with complete wing backs, you need players who have great work rate, have great pace. Naturally, if your centre mids are slightly more defensively orientated, that might not be quite as important. But at the same time, you know, this is a role that is very common within football now, the complete wing back. And I think the reason it's so kind of popular is because starting from slightly deeper and having more defensively minded players who are trained to get forward into the attack, you know, it works very, very well. You think of some examples in modern football, you think of kind of Marcelo out on the left, perhaps a slightly odd one, but an example of a player who's been trained to play this more kind of complete wing back role as opposed to be a winger who, you know, has a little bit more to do defensively, is someone like Ashley Young at Manchester United, a player who obviously conventionally a winger, plays left back a lot of the time, cutting in on his right hand side. A player who, to be honest, defies all expectations by his sheer athleticism given his age. But yeah, I really do feel like, you know, complete wing-backs are the way to go, or at least wing-backs in general, as opposed to wide midfielders. If you did want to go with wide midfielders, what would I recommend? Wide midfielder on support is pretty good, to be honest, particularly if you don't want them to get too high up the pitch. That could certainly work if you're going with a free striker system. You could try inverted winger, although again, the winger, the wide playmaker role and the winger role, at least on attack, you're going to be leaving yourself very exposed at the back. So I'd err away, I'd want to stay away from them, to be honest. If you were going to go with something like this, you could even, you know, go with a defensive midfielder, and then that might give you a little bit more room to be a little more attacking with your players in the wider areas. But I do feel like 3 at the back certainly has its strengths. One of its big weaknesses is obviously if you lose the ball in these wide areas. I've already talked about it, but if you commit your wing backs or your wingers high up the pitch, you lose the ball. There is going to be space behind in the wide areas to exploit. But that also kind of works into one of its main strengths. I feel like 3 at the back is great against teams that like to exploit the channels. And what I mean by the channels is the gaps between players. Just naturally in a back 4, you have a lot of these kind of gaps. If you're playing against a team who play, say, 2 inside forwards and a striker sits between the 2 centre backs, the inside forwards cut in, perhaps in behind. The wing backs are going to create an overload on the full backs if your wide midfielders don't track back. There's all this space to exploit, whereas actually playing 3 at the back can very much kind of shut that down. You know, by playing 3 at the back, you're kind of matching them man for man, which if you're a superior side can really, really work in your favour. It's a great platform for a good defence. You know, if you're a team looking to play on the counter-attack, I can't recommend this enough. You know, if you really want to hit teams on the break, you're not the most gifted technically, you could easily go for kind of something more like this, a very defensively minded 3 at the back system where you do play kind of a free, what would you call this? I guess you'd call it like a 5-3-2 kind of conventionally speaking, maybe with just the wing backs on support, hitting early crosses into some bigger players. Obviously, with this kind of system where you have so many players back, it really does open up opportunities for you to have these two centre mids just go crazy with how attacking they are, because you're going to have so much in the way of cover. I do feel like 3 at the back is pretty good in Football Manager at the moment this year. I've not done too much extensive testing with it just yet. However, it's something that I definitely want to look into as the year does go on, and I recommend that you guys try it out for yourself if it's a system that fits your team, if it's something that you want to try out, and maybe if this video's got you a little bit inspired. Anyway, I think I've done enough talking for now just about 3 at the back, just some of my general thoughts. I'd like to hear your thoughts down in the comments with regards to this video, as I mentioned at the start. Would you like to see more content like this? Is there anything that I've touched upon here that you agree with, disagree with? Obviously, at the end of the day, this is just kind of my general thoughts on the thing. I've got some notes written out in front of me, but I am kind of just talking on the fly, just about some tactical ideas that I guess buzz around in my head from time to time. Anyway, that is going to be all from me, guys. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, leave a like on it. If you are new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe. And other than that, feel free to check out all the other FM19 content that's been going on the channel. And it is me, Jack, and I will talk to you guys in a bit. I'm out.